Welcome to Spiritual Naturalism Today, a conversation on science, nature, and spirituality. Our program is sponsored by the Spiritual Naturalist Society with host Daniel Strain.
Hello, and thanks for listening. I'm joined by my co-host, B.T. Newberg.
Hello.
And today we will be interviewing our special guest, Thomas W. Clark.
Hi, Daniel. Good to be here.
Thanks. And on the topic, our topic today will be naturalism and the search for truth, transcendence, and meaning. Tom Clark is founder and director of the Center for Naturalism and creator of Naturalism.org, which is among the web's most comprehensive resources on worldview naturalism, its implications and applications. He is author of Encountering Naturalism, a Worldview and Its Uses, and he lectures on science, naturalism, ethics, free will, consciousness, and related philosophical and social concerns. You can learn more at Naturalism.org, and Encountering Naturalism is also available in the SNS Amazon store, which we will link to on this episode's page at spiritualnaturalistsociety.org. Tom, thank you so much for coming today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, very good to be with you and Brendan, so thanks for having me.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty of our topic, I wanted to just, for our audience, ask you a little bit about how you got into this and how you started the Center for Naturalism and your book and all of that kind of thing.
Well, I'll try to keep it brief, but I was exposed after college to the writings of a East-West philosopher named Alan Watts, who you may have heard of.
Yes.
And,
yes.
And he was a kind of a rascal, but he was also very smart, a great speaker, and I was entranced by his interpretation of Eastern philosophy for a Western audience, and read his books avidly, and I got into Buddhism and meditation, and for a while was very much interested in the sort of Eastern approach to enlightenment as sort of a solution, the ultimate solution to one's problems, and discovered that no, that wasn't going to work. I got interested in Western philosophy, studied under Dan Dennett at Tufts University for a while, and discovered that the Western tradition had a lot in common in certain respects in the philosophy of mind to Buddhism and Eastern philosophy. And through that sort of combination, developed my own encounter with what became worldview naturalism, as we'll get into it, I think your listeners will probably know, as opposed to supernaturalism. So those two influences, East and West, combined in me, and through the study of things like addiction and behavioral health from a naturalistic perspective, I got more and more into developing naturalism as a worldview that applies to not just, say, spiritual or existential concerns, but to the whole gamut of human concerns. And then started the Center for Naturalism, thinking that there should be, what there wasn't at that point, a center or specific study of naturalism as a worldview, a science-based worldview. And so Naturalism.org actually started back in 1998, so it's been around for quite a while, and continue to add material to it, both my own and other people's. And then, as you guys know, there are many aspects to naturalism. I'm very pleased that the Spiritual Naturalist Society is exploring the spiritual side of a naturalistic worldview. That's terrific, even though some people, of course, have a problem with the word spirituality.
Yes.
But we can debate that.
Nobody has that problem ever.
Right. So it's been a long road, but a very satisfying one, and continues to develop. So there are many sides to naturalism and many twists and turns in terms of my own story about how I got into it. But that's a brief thumbnail.
Oh, that's wonderful. So what kinds of things does the center do? Is it mainly a collecting together writings and works and thoughts along these lines?
Yeah, it's meant to sort of bring together people like yourselves and others who are not necessarily spiritually inclined to write and think and interact about naturalism as a worldview, specifically naturalism. As we know, there's a lot of talk about atheism and humanism and skepticism and free thought. Naturalism really isn't on the radar too much these days, although more and more, I'm happy to say, and I want to mention right here, physicist Sean Carroll has got a new book out called The Big Picture, which is really about naturalism as a worldview from his perspective as a physicist. It's a wonderful book. I highly recommend it. So that's coming out, and it is directed to broadening and encouraging the understanding of naturalism as a worldview. So that's great. We need more of that. But that's what the Center for Naturalism is about. And naturalism.org, which you mentioned up front, is really where the action is in terms of new material that's being added, discussion, and all of that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
I know that.
On me.
I'm sorry, BT. I think I interrupted you. What was that?
No. Sorry. Yeah, I was just saying it was a big influence on me reading Tom's stuff on naturalism.org. It was when I was trying to explore that for myself and figure out my naturalistic spirituality. Like, it was one of the first places that I discovered that had a really kind of coherent presentation. And also just a clean design. not that makes like a huge difference, but it just gives off a good aura. It's nice warm colors and stuff.
Well, thank you for that compliment. I mean, I think aesthetics has a lot to do with how things actually get absorbed, and so a clean design that I take that as a high compliment. Thank you, Brendan.
I come from an art background, and I agree. I think that it tells people what it's your basically your visual facial expression as you're presenting these things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was going to say that it influenced me a lot too. I think your pages on spirituality on naturalism.org were definitely one of the things I read, along with as well your book, Encountering Naturalism. When was that book written?
That was 2007. Gosh, almost 10 years ago, and I really want to revise it and expand it. You got to get around to doing that because some of my views have changed a little bit since then. Mostly not, but some have. I hope in a more mature, encompassing way. So that's a project that I hope to get around to at some point.
Oh, we'll look forward to that. All right. Well, let's talk about truth, transcendence, and meaning. Those are big things, and BT pointed out before we got started that those are huge things to approach, especially in the time we have. But why don't you gave us an excellent summary of what you mean by each of these. Why don't we
Yeah, well, I hope you guys recorded it because I don't think I can replicate it. No.
I think what Daniel's trying to ask is, Tom, what is the meaning of life?
Right.
That would be great.
Well, first of all, what I'd like to say is that I really appreciate the SNS, Spiritual Naturalist Society, for doing what you're doing, because you're connecting naturalism as an orientation with spirituality. And as much as that might strike some people as oxymoronic, because spirituality is often connected with dualism, what you're showing is that, and I've tried to show as well, that actually it's overcoming dualism that's the key to an authentic, satisfying, and truthful spirituality.
Yes.
Right? Because
absolutely.
The supernaturalist idea about spirituality is that we have a higher immaterial self that can connect with ultimate reality, and the material world is sort of second class. And that's really too bad, because we are material creatures after all, even though we have mental states and consciousness, but we're physical through and through. And so a spiritual naturalism, the way you are presenting it and the way I've tried to present it, is really to say, no, we can be completely naturalistic in our orientation and still address the questions of that spirituality is concerned with, what we can call existential questions. So truth, I think, is central to the spiritual quest, because after all, what we want to know in in the existential domain is what we're ultimately engaged in. Who are we essentially? What is our situation truthfully?
Right.
That's the truth. If we don't embark on a spiritual quest supposing that we want to be deceived, we want to get to the bottom of things as we can best understand it. So, it's not. We shouldn't be embarrassed to talk about truth with a capital T, because when push comes to shove in our lives, we really want to know what's up if we're curious. Sadly, many people can't get there. They don't have the time or energy to address this question. But even then, it can become the idea of what the truth of one's situation is, can be, and sometimes just forces it upon yourself, at moments like facing someone's death or your own death or having an existential crisis. You can be driven to know why and what is this all about. So what is the truth? So that's the truth as sort of a quest from a naturalistic standpoint. And naturalism takes science as our best way of knowing about what is the case. And it's a tough road, and you guys should obviously interrupt me if I'm going to carry on too much here. But
no, I think I really love the way that you said it's a quest. Truth is not a possession; it's a quest,
nor a destination.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like everybody likes to talk about truth, but I think the thing about a naturalistic worldview is that it forces you to understand that truth is the goal, but it's not. There's so many pitfalls along the way that it cries out for humility as we approach it.
Right. We did a whole episode on the humble approach to knowledge related to that. Yeah.
Good. Cognitive humility is one way that I sometimes put it. And cognitive responsibility to the truth as we best understand our reliable ways of knowing what's real. And here I think science just does not have a rival. And naturalism, a worldview naturalism, is based in a scientific empirical approach to understanding what is the case out there. That is, we want intersubjective evidence. We don't trust our personal experience. We don't trust hearsay, sacred texts, intuition, gurus, or anything like that.
Tom, if I can just interject, by intersubjective evidence, what you mean is what you said right after that, right? That we don't just trust our own intuition. That's what that means, right?
Right. What do we trust? We trust evidence that's observable by other agents that we interact with. So our experience, our opinions, and our observations are corroborated by our peers. And the way we take evidence is on. We don't suppose that it isn't revisable, that there could always be something further that might change our view about something. But so that's the humility in front of the evidence that we assume. But it's also the case that we're not barred from making fairly substantive conclusions about what is the case based on the evidence in hand. So, to wit, there is no supernatural realm as far as we can tell. There's no deep division in reality between the natural and the supernatural. That's sort of a very well substantiated truth that we can assert right now, given all the evidence, all the empirical evidence.
So one of the things that I like to do is I like to pay attention to how language is used to set the stage or to establish the norms. And so very often a supernatural, natural dichotomy kind of sets up this situation. It sets the stage where you're left with sounding like you're denying. But I'd rather look at it from the point of view of naturalism is this view that everything is one integrated whole. There's not a wall down the middle. I think there's a beauty to that. And I think it's important that we be able to see the beauty, because I guess this moves into the second of our three things. But, with truth, you have a whole bunch of facts. And so everything we've been talking about, the skeptical approach, the scientific approach, there's a lot of organizations and a lot of work being done. It's already been done in these areas, and still yet to do. But what we like to focus on at SNS is what comes next. You know, you take these building blocks of these facts, and now how do we respond to them? And so I think the second word in our topic, transcendence, may be really a really fascinating one to hear what naturalists have to say about transcendence, given a unified one whole reality.
Yeah, nice segue, Daniel. yeah, no, that's perfect. Exactly. That's the big thing about it, right? Is because so many people look at the dichotomy, look at naturalism, and think, oh, naturalism, no God. So this is all. This is it. And it sounds so small, but no, it's really, really big. Like, we are like one with the whole universe, right? As Neil deGrasse Tyson likes to say, I look at the cosmos and it makes me feel huge because I'm connected to everything, genetically, chemically, atomically. I'm huge.
Right. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right on. And so the naturalistic worldview situates us in this incomprehensibly vast structure, manifold of what might be a multiverse. We'll call it the cosmos, right? We don't really have an idea of its complete dimensions, but we know that it's astoundingly large, that we're just a very small part of it. And that's what's so wonderful about the scientific picture that naturalism is built on, is that it does situate us in something that so far outstrips the human dimension. It's an impersonal situation to be situated in, but that to me is actually one of the exciting things about naturalism. One of the exciting things about the scientific worldview is that we're put inside of this unimaginably and very mysterious, ultimately, situation of being part of a naturally evolved cosmos that cannot be pinned down with any ultimate purpose or significance that's of a human dimension. It's really we're demanding of the universe something that it really can't supply. So the way I like to put it is, if the supernaturalist is worried that the naturalist can't supply a kind of meaning, a human scale meaning, well, sorry, but that's the cool thing about being naturalism, that it goes far beyond our sort of meager human demand and shows us to be really in the midst of something that outstrips our imaginations, even our understanding. But of course, we get there through scientific understanding, and we meet this kind of inscrutable existential wall, which rebuffs our demand for ultimate meaning. So just to get back to transcendence, what happens is that we find ourselves, our little human selves, as you said, completely connected into something that I think inevitably transcends the demand for meaning, so that we're not in an absurd universe, we're in something that transcends the meaningless distinction. So that's one kind of transcendence. The other transcendence, of course, is that we are part of something that's just much, much larger. And we grow out of it, and every single moment right now, even as we're speaking, we're participating in it in a way that we cannot extricate ourselves. So there's a kind of transcendence there too. I think it's the connection, the deep connection, is a kind of transcendence. But of course, there's the whole experiential part as well of spiritual experience, which I know you guys are investigating.
I think that's why the Buddhists tended to gravitate eventually toward the ego, because they also have more of an impersonal sort of cosmic view, and so it naturally makes you start to question, well, maybe it's not that nature is small, maybe it's that my little concerns, I need to transcend that. I need to transcend my own small little cage of an ego and connect and reach out greater and have a larger view.
Yeah, good point, Daniel. And it can sound kind of highfalutin when we talk about it in terms like that, like a Buddhist would have talking about ego or there being no self. But we all kind of get this experience now and then. There's a really good passage in Ursula Goodenough's book, The Sacred Depths of Nature, that describes basically the same experience really well. There's a passage where she's relating how she was laying on her back looking up at the stars in the sky and just felt just so overwhelmed because she felt like such a tiny and insignificant being in the wake of this huge, vast cosmos that couldn't possibly care about her and her concerns. And it was kind of just a mortifying weight on her. And it reminded me of the feeling that mystics sometimes describe. Rudolf Otto describes it as creature feeling, as you just feel like this, just like tiny, disgusting little, growth that shouldn't be there in the universe somehow. But, and that's a totally valid experience, but the expansion of and the growth of yourself, your character development, it's when you can push through that and then see, okay, yeah, I am really small. I mean, but I'm also something so much larger. There's the small self, and that's me. That's my biographical self. It's me, my consciousness, my memory. It's what will die when my body perishes. But I am also connected to everything else. Everything else is given birth to me. After I die, my body will decompose. My atoms will go out and become something else. And it's just this continuum of being that really is, in that sense, the big self. You are the cosmos. And that's where you have a different kind of transcendence. It's no longer the creature feeling, but this sense of the big self, this oceanic merger with something greater than the small you.
Yeah. One way I like to think about this is that most of life we're embedded in what could be called the ordinary life, and we take it for granted. And that's how life is most of the time. But what an encounter with a spirituality, like a naturalistic spirituality, can do is to vault us out of the ordinary into the extraordinary, in terms of feeling connected the way you just described it. And also to put our human concerns in a much larger context that can sort of make them palatable, actually take the curse off of life in some respects, So I think this is one of the things that addressing existential concerns can do, is really to make our ordinary lives easier, more manageable. We can learn to accept and to inhabit them more wisely by addressing these existential concerns. And unfortunately, not everyone gets to do that. But so we are lucky in being able to address these questions. And so in terms of transcendence, again, it's that the little self and its concerns can be, from time to time seen in this larger context. And that can have a direct emotional and psychological impact on us that can then feed back into ordinary life, which I think was one of the Buddha's goal, right? Was to really to deal with pain, to deal with alienation and suffering and death by going very deeply into the question of what it meant to be alive and conscious and in the world. And that's, I think, what we're trying to do here from a strictly naturalistic perspective. Mm-hmm. And it can have the same kind of value and the same kind of resonance and meaning that the supernaturalist approaches can have. But I think the advantage, getting back to truth, is that it is true. We don't have to deceive ourselves. We don't have to engage in wishful thinking or illusions. And that's to me one of the wonderful things about science and naturalism.
One of the big breakthroughs, I think, of spiritual naturalism is that it's a spirituality and a spiritual set of spiritual practices whereby we don't look to our spirituality as a source of facts or claims. Mm-hmm. Instead, very often a spiritual practice is about cultivating perspectives on those facts, and what we're going to value and what we're not. And one of the things that's really instructive to me, or really drives the point home for me, is when I notice things like one day I'll get up and I'll go out in my car and I'll drive somewhere, and the little things that happen along the way are incredibly aggravating. Somebody not going as fast as they should, or stubbing my toe on the door, or whatever it is, And then other days, those same exact events can take place, and it's no big deal because I'm in a different mindset. And so a big part of spiritual practice is learning to know yourself and understand what's going on in your own mind, and learning to direct your attention and toward your judgments that you make about those facts, and the value judgments you place on them, and why you place those value judgments, and what effect that has on your flourishing.
Yeah, and also we should probably point out for people who are listening to us for the first time that this stuff that we're talking about right now is what we mean by spirituality, by that term. We're talking about this kind of growth, connectedness, sense of meaning. That's what we mean by spirituality in the Spiritual Naturalist Society.
Right. It isn't anything dualistic or airy-fairy. It's quite concrete and this world oriented. So that's great. And so more power to you for that. But I have to say, for me, taking the big perspective, what Sean Carroll's book, his title is The Big Picture, taking the big picture view of ourselves really does help in dealing with the everyday aggravations. It really helps to have this cognitive context within which to put things in perspective. It doesn't always work, of course. I mean, there's no magic bullet here. If you don't have enough to eat for a long enough time, if you get beaten up or aggressed on too much, you're not, no amount of philosophy or a mantra is going to save you. But for much of our lives, it really does help to have this kind of resource, the cognitive context of naturalism, to apply to one's life, such that things are easier to take, and not just easier, but can actually lead to transcendent experience. For instance, when meditating. So I think a spiritual naturalism can give you a kind of resilience, because you're not wedded to any falsehoods, at least as far as we know. You're not going to be disappointed. You're sort of armored against disappointment in a way, because you've stripped yourself of any kind of demand for reassurance. It's a kind of tough view, but I really think it does. It has lots of virtues for those who can find that they can stick with science and naturalism, and that's not always so easy.
That's wonderful. I'm really inspired by the all of the different possibilities. There's so many different rich traditions that we've already have depths of wisdom to draw from, and then we also have modern studies going on today about the mind and about happiness, and there's just so much to learn that I like to remind people that part of the practice is building your practice, especially for a spiritual naturalist, since there's kind of a new direction emerging in our society, at least. And putting it all together is part of the exploration.
Yeah, speaking of practice, I meditate occasionally, not regularly. I find sitting and quieting the mind to be a good practice, but I don't suppose it's a direct route to any kind of perception of reality in itself, because after all, it's experience. But perhaps you guys could say something about what you think of as spiritual practice, and I could react to it.
Well, the way I put it in the most mean, gross, and plain terms as possible is like it's cultivating good mental habits. Simple as that is what it is. And that's how I basically describe it in the SNS course that we have. You can have the big picture cognitive context, and you can understand it at a cerebral level. But you've got habits that you've cultivated throughout a whole lifetime, and that's how your life tends to flow, unless you break those habits by practicing to change them. And meditation is one way. There's lots of other ways, but it's just training your mind to think differently, training yourself to behave differently, and to put forward a different life stance. That's how I think about practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that, and I like what when you touched on the difference between knowing something and actually, going about your life in that way. Very often we see these little memes or things on social media, these inspirational posters with the sunsets and the nice, pretty quote from some source, and it seems inspiring and it's true, and we go, yes, I need to remember that. And then real life happens and we blow up, or we get angry, or we worry, or we get fearful, and then we have to go back to those quotes and remind ourselves again, and we have to keep doing that. And then so it's like we say we agree with it, but then why does our mind not follow and act that way? And so you can actually transform yourself over time to where you do naturally react that way as those what's kind of a surface intellectual knowledge about the big picture gets more deeply ingrained over time. And one of the ways that it gets more deeply ingrained, I think, one of the types of practices that I like are a category of practices, you could say, called rituals. And there are various, plethora of ritual types. But for me, part of what's important about rituals is that you're constructing an encounter or an event or a experience that will touch on more than just the intellectual part of your mind, but touch on the emotional and your memories and the poetic and the artistic and creative parts of your mind. And by touching all of these different parts of the network, it more deeply allows you to grok the idea, to really get the perspectives in a way where you thought you understood them before, and then there's that aha epiphany, and you feel like you've kind of reached a new plateau in your understanding, and it starts to really affect how you naturally respond to different events that were challenging before.
Yeah, that all makes good sense to me. I'm thinking that there are certain goals involved that, in terms of a practice, trying to get to, say, a kind of equanimity, compassion, certain kinds of experiences, deep experiences of, say, acceptance and meaning, an ability to deal with tough situations, and also an ability to really deeply enjoy positive situations. So they're practical goals that feed back into ordinary life that a naturalistic spirituality is really aimed at. So that's what the practice is for. So practice being aimed at practical things, I guess you'd say. But again, it's in this very broad context of a worldview, where the touchstone is staying connected to the truth, as we first talked about it, where we're trying to stay undiluted about our situation. And I think the Buddha very much thought and was aimed at trying to stay undiluted about our psychological situation and also our existential situation as he saw it. Of course, there were certain issues about he wasn't completely scientific in how could he be, but the Buddha was very empirical about looking at human psychology, though, and human experience, and that's why meditation, I think, is so valuable. Not because it's a route to ultimate truth, but because it really is a way to look at our own experience truthfully and to see what arises, and also find experiences that are quite marvelous. So I do recommend meditative practice to people.
That's
so the we wanted to talk about meaning. I think that was the last word. I don't know how much time we have.
Yeah, we're right near the end of our time, and I think a lot of this flow has already flowed well into meaning. Did you have any final words about meaning before we wrap up?
Well, I think I sort of touched on this near the start, which is we can't construe existence as a whole as having a meaning or purpose, because meanings and purposes are assigned by an intelligent agent on things. And we do it all the time. And in ordinary life, we try to assign meanings. Well, we assign meaning to things all the time. We find life meaningful or not, depending on whether we're satisfied with what we're doing. And then we take that question and we apply it to life itself. We say, well, what's the meaning of it all? And then we find ourselves rebuffed because there isn't any apparent meaning from a scientific naturalistic standpoint. And that is something that I think that actually is refreshing. It can be the source of existential astonishment, as I like to put it, a kind of open-ended amazement at our situation, which I think is really pretty cool. It's
liberating.
It's far more interesting, even if it's unsettling, far more interesting than most supernaturalist religions have to offer. So, we find local meanings all the time. I'm finding this a very meaningful conversation. The problem of meaning has been solved for me over this past half hour quite nicely. So thank you all.
Solved. Just solved. Yep.
Yeah.
Solved. We got that,
Well,
folks. We're done. Turn off the podcast now.
It's also inspiring to know that we are the meaning makers. And that's like, it's like a power we have, is we get to decide what the meaning of things are. And I like to think of it also in terms of formal logic. If you were to convert words into formal logic, you'd see that meaning is to say, what is the meaning of X? It's kind of, that's a meaningless statement in itself, because to me, there's a pair. Have you ever heard of the if-then statement? If this, then that. If X, then one, so on and so on. Yeah. You would never say if something and then just stop there. It's always if this, then. The if and then are a pair, a logical pair. So to me, the meaning thing is half of a logical pair. It's always meaning to. Right. The meaning of this to that, Right. Just to say it has meaning is, incomplete statement.
It's like looking for some kind of effluvia or special spiritual substance, like spiritual in the cloud in the sky, kind of spiritual sort of thing. Something beyond. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. In other words, it always relates back to some kind of intelligence, some kind of desire for purpose or activity that relates to an agent, like, we're human agents. And I think that's absolutely right. And what we're not going to find is a meaning external to our demand for it, pasted on existence as a whole. We're not going to find it there. And our demand for that is going to be, we're not going to find it met, but it doesn't mean that the demand for meaning doesn't get satisfied in all sorts of ways in our lives. That's what happens with us, and it's a good thing. We can find meaning in wonderful things and in tragic things too. There it is. It's the full catastrophe, as Zorba the Greek put it.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for your time again. It always feels with these kind of topics that they could go on and on and on. It never feels like we have enough time, but that's a good thing. So I really appreciate you being with us today.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to talk with you. Very meaningful for me, I hope for you, and I hope for our listeners. And so thanks very much, and do keep up the great work at the SNS. I really appreciate what you're doing. Thanks so much.
Thank you. That means a lot. And thank you all for listening. Please check out our other episodes on our website at spiritualnaturalistsociety.org. And until next time, we hope you have a wonderful month.
Yep, and check out our course as well. We have a course, and it focuses a whole lot on what we've been talking about today, a whole lot on meaning.
Yes, goes into a lot more depth on it. So
Yeah.
thank you for that, and thank you, BT, for joining us too.
Thank you.
This program was sponsored by the Spiritual Naturalist Society. Learn more and become a member at spiritualnaturalistsociety.org. Our music was composed by John Clemisrude. Jay Forrest is our technical director. Please share our program and join us next time on Spiritual Naturalism Today.